Hi everybody. I apologize for not being in class, but you're getting all of the information here straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, if I were a horse. All right, we're going to talk today about a very kind of new idea, relatively new anyway, the idea that psychology, how you think about things, can impact your physical health. It may seem kind of a foregone conclusion nowadays. You understand that stress is bad, can potentially lead to cardiovascular issues and other issues as well. But this was only discovered really fairly recently, and by recently I mean in the late 1950s, early 60s. It really was just first characterized, and there are a whole host of issues that come out of how we think about things in terms of physical health. And so, a lot of this, involves, I show the Alice in Wonderland slide here, who are you? This is the famous caterpillar line. What are your personality characteristics? How do you react to things? Do some people say that you overreact sometimes? These are all factors in how we think about things and of course, downstream, how that impacts our physical health. Are you opinionated? Easygoing? Do you get stressed out? I think everybody has a threshold at which they get stressed out. Some folks, it happens a little more easily. Some, they're a little more, hardened, so to speak. Don't get stressed out as easily. Some people express it. Sometimes that's good. Some people keep it pent up, and that can be bad. How do you think about things? Do you think it matters in terms of your health? Of course it does. And we're going to go through a lot of instances of this and why it's important from a number of different perspectives. Okay, so we're going to learn about how psychology impacts physical health. And this interface is extremely important. It's being implemented into public health policy now, and folks are getting trained on it, medical professionals, learning how to manage psychology, how you think about things, stress, holistically. Now that coupled with diet, exercise, all of that stuff. And so you will hear more about this. I'm going to give you the lowdown today, but rest assured, you'll hear more going forward in your life. Health is important up here, you can see, for a number of reasons. We obviously want to be healthy. What's going on now is that we are living long enough to slowly fall apart. And that sounds a little morbid, I know. It used to be a few hundred years ago that we were taken down relatively young, age 35, 40, maybe 45, by infectious disease or injuries, accidents, stuff like that. Now we live long enough for diseases, aging diseases, to manifest. And of course, these diseases we call cancer in many cases is an aging disease. Macular degeneration, Alzheimer's disease is a disease of aging. And you look at this in terms of finances, and this is why I've probably mentioned in class before, this is something that you guys are going to be charged with solving. You've got the obesity epidemic that feeds into a lot of this, and you look at the charts here, the healthcare cost by age and gender. And you see that it sort of rapidly increases, nearly exponentially, after about the age of 50. So it costs more. Of course, more things potentially can go wrong as you age, health-wise. And so we pour a lot of money into healthcare, of course, and taking care of people, keeping them healthy, keeping them alive, it costs a lot. And so I don't mean to suck the romance out of it, but we spend a lot of money, and by we I mean America. You see, we spend the most, and our life expectancy, the upper right chart there, you see it's about 78 years, and by the way, that's going backwards. The life expectancy, if you haven't heard, is going backwards in America, and that's worrisome considering we have all this modern healthcare, technology and all of that. Yet the health of the nation is suffering greatly. So we live about 78. You look at Japan, about 83. That's a 5-year difference, and look they spend about 1/3 as much as we do on healthcare. They're healthier. And by the way, it's 2014 now, and that difference is nearly 7 years. Okay, so that discrepancy is going up. They spend less, they live longer, and and for good reason. They overall, as a population, have healthier diets, have healthier lifestyles, and so, there's some data for you on. Why don't zebras get ulcers? This is a funny question, isn't it? There's a neat book by Robert Sapolsky on this very topic, and I teach a class on stress based on that book. Animals don't get diseases that we, like heart disease, cardiovascular disease, ulcers, things like this. They do not get these diseases. Why? Well, they don't get these diseases because when they have a stressor, an environmental stress in their lives, they take care of it quickly, and usually it's through a physical reaction. So, for instance, a zebra, is aware of a lion, this lion that's hunting it, and it gets a little too close. The zebra, has the sympathetic nervous system becomes aroused. They, feel the anxiety. They run. They sprint. Okay, they burn off all of those byproducts in their bloodstream from the stress response, and it goes away, and the stress is gone. Either that or they've been eaten. Okay, so in either case, the stress doesn't matter. It's gone, it's served its purpose, you're done. We get stressed out, and we don't have any physical outlet, any physical need nowadays. Okay, we don't burn off these byproducts. They circulate in our blood. Okay, cortisol, these steroid hormones, glucose, fats get liberated, all for a physical response to a stressor. This is the way it's supposed to be. But of course, nowadays, it's not like that. All right, you fester, you worry about things, money problems, relationship problems, tests in psychology classes, these kinds of things, and you ruminate. They spin around in your head, and you don't have an outlet. Okay, this is why exercise, I always say, if you're stressed out, go run around the block. Drop and do some push-ups, something like that. This is kind of how we're supposed to react. The psychological stress reaction is identical in physiology to a physical stress reaction. If you're exercising very, very hard, or somebody hits you with a stick, something like that, it produces the same reaction in the body. So this is an important point. We'll get more at that a little bit later. Leading causes of death in 1900. This is just a little over 100 years ago. Pneumonia was the leading cause. Do people die of pneumonia now? Extremely rarely. They do, but it's very, very rare. Tuberculosis, TB. All right, another leading cause of death a little over 100 years ago. Not today. Okay, you'll hear of little flare-ups here and there, but again, incredibly rare. The flu was a leading cause of death. Typically, we don't die from the flu nowadays. We have that infectious disease aspect under control, generally speaking. Childbirth was a leading cause of death in 1900, and this includes the child and the mother giving birth. Okay, we obviously, modern medicine has helped us greatly in this regard. In 1918, look at this, more people died from the flu pandemic of 1918. 20 million people died versus 8.5 million from World War I, one of the bloodiest wars of all time. All right, so these infectious diseases that we've not necessarily eradicated, but certainly protected ourselves against, they have resulted in a shift in what causes us to perish now. So now, like I mentioned before, we live long enough to slowly fall apart. What kills us now? This is from 2009. Things have not changed much in 5 years. Here's the deal. Heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory diseases, COPD, stuff like that, stroke, and then lastly, accidents, less frequent. But all of these are associated with aging. Okay, most of these diseases manifest later in life, most of them. Okay, so the pattern is different. Because of this pattern, obviously we're living longer, okay, but we're faced with this culmination of damage that happens throughout our lives, and it winds up manifesting as cancer, heart disease, stroke, stuff like that. What do we do about it? Can you age better? Can you age well to the point where you hold on to your function for 90 years and then, give it up, and go without being, a huge burden? This is the challenge now. Okay, so nearly all of these modern day causes of death can be exacerbated by stress. Okay, certainly you are probably aware of the relationship between, cardiovascular disease and stress. Cancer, the same thing, diabetes, obesity, these things are all exacerbated by stress. So you recognize stress in yourselves, you feel it, and it's natural, so don't stress out about stressing. It is a natural thing. You're supposed to be able to feel this. It stems from emotion, okay, reaction. It's how you handle it, it's how you deal with it, how you sort of moderate it, keep it reasonably low, okay? Well, what is a stressor? How do you define stress? It's tricky defining any emotion. Certainly, emotions are at the root of stress. What is a stressor? So biologically, we can talk about it. Stress occurs when an environmental demand exceeds the natural regulatory capacity of the organism. All right, so you get too cold, you shiver. You're too hot, you sweat. Okay, if you're hungry, you try to find something to eat. All right, that kind of thing. Psychologically, all right, it's a similar kind of event. All right, this occurs when we must adapt to changing conditions. All right, the conditions might be real. There might be a threat. Somebody's yelling at you or something. That's a real condition, or it might be perceived. You might imagine something happening. Maybe you sort of have a bleak outlook on things. And of course, then you stress out about it. Okay, so that's completely imaginary, really, when it comes down to it. We all do this, though. So, and by the way, it can be prevented. You can change your way of looking at things. All right. So, in a nutshell, we're throwing ourselves out of balance. Stress throws you out of homeostasis, equilibrium. We discussed this a little bit with regard to motivation the other day. And this is the same kind of concept. All right, homeostasis appears to be at the core of stress. You throw yourselves out of balance with psychological stress. Could be left, right, up, down, whatever. Something's tugging you one way or the other, and sometimes it's a good thing. It's a term called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. Eustress is when you have a happy laughter, a burst of laughter, or something great happens. You can think of, at a party, or maybe, your high school graduation or something, good times. I mean, it technically is throwing you out of balance in a good way, and there are positive benefits to eustress, okay, as opposed to what we typically think of stress as being a negative psychological situation. All right, so here's a personality assessment. I want you guys to do this. If you have a little sheet of paper available, you can actually find this out. And we're going to figure out something very important for you guys by doing this little assessment here. So answer the following questions by writing yes or no in the space provided on your paper. Okay, and here we go. Here's number one. There's only 10 of these, so not a big deal. Do you find it difficult to restrain yourself from hurrying others' speech, finishing their sentences for them? So you're discussing something with someone, and you end up finishing their sentence. You kind of butt in a little bit. Do you find yourself doing that often? Number two, do you often try to do more than one thing at a time? Eat and read simultaneously. You're driving and texting, these kinds of things. Do you often do that? Feel like you need to do that? Number three, do you often feel guilty if you use extra time to relax? Do you start so worrying about, oh gosh, I've got to do that. I really should be doing, this other thing because I have these other responsibilities. Number four, do you tend to get involved in a great number of projects at once? 5, do you find yourself racing through yellow lights when you drive? Okay, yellow doesn't mean slow down necessarily, right? It means speed up. All right, is this more your style? Yellow lights, you race through them. Number 6, do you need to win in order to derive enjoyment from games and sports? Do you absolutely, really, honestly, be honest about it, do you need to win to derive enjoyment? Do you generally move, walk, and eat rapidly? You think about this. Are you usually weaving around people, walking through on campus? Do you eat pretty quickly? You're able to eat a whole meal in under 10 minutes? All right. 8. Do you agree to take on too many responsibilities? All right. This sort of ties into number 4. All right. It's hard to say no to people. Do you find yourself taking on a lot of responsibilities? You want to accomplish a lot. Maybe it's too much. Number 9. Do you detest waiting in line? Now, nobody likes to wait in line. I understand that. But do you detest it? Does it absolutely drive you nuts? Okay? Or can you just stand there and take a deep breath and be like, okay, whatever, I can handle this. All right. 10. Do you have an intense desire to better your position in life and impress others? All right. So honestly, answer all of those, yes or no. And then we'll come back and revisit this, and I'll tell you what's going on. All right, I'm going to find out some aspect of your personality that's probably pretty important to know about. All right, here we go. We're going to get into some of the early stuff on psychological stress and how it impacts your health. So Friedman and Rosenman. All right, these guys are a couple of cardiologists. They went to medical school together, opened their practices in the same town, and they conducted this study. It was based on some interesting observations that they made, all right, regarding their patients, coronary heart disease patients. And here's the actual citation, and I'll post the publication on ELC, so you can refer to it if you're interested. This is again 1959, so a little while ago. But not terribly long in scientific time. Okay, both Friedman and Rosenman, they were cardiologists, and Friedman one day he noticed that his waiting room seats were wearing down really quickly and in an odd pattern. And again, these seats were only about 1.5 years or 2 years old. So, and made out of kind of a tough vinyl, waiting room seats in a doctor's office, a pretty tough vinyl material. And so they were wearing through in the front part of the seats where a person's, bottom would normally be. And so he says, well, what's going on? So he calls a friend who happens to be a dentist. And they got their seats at about the same time. And he says, Bob, or whatever the dentist's, friend's name was, what do your seats look like? Are they worn through? Are they wearing? Is it just poor material? Because they got them from the same manufacturer. And the dentist, let's call him Bob, says, no, my seats are fine. And he was busy, had a lot of patients coming in. I haven't experienced any problems with my seats. What's going on with yours? Well, he says, well, on the front edge of the seat there, I've got this wear pattern. I mean, it's like I've got to replace my seats here in a few months, or else they're going to start developing holes. So I'm concerned about that. Friedman says, well, maybe it's my patients, the kind of people that are in my office. Maybe people who develop heart disease are fundamentally different than those who don't. So Friedman and Rosenman, the friends, they discussed this and speculated that, people who are exposed to chronic periods of stress, these, maybe businessmen or whatever, excessive drive, pressure to meet deadlines, competitive situations, all of this ties into this leading into heart disease. All right, it could actually be at the base of it. So what can wear patterns on upholstery tell us about personality? It can tell us a whole lot, actually, believe it or not. And this is where we get into terms that you've heard before, probably. Type A, this is where it came from, this 1959 study. They termed Type A people, the personality, as highly competitive, believe they must always win, they're impatient, in a hurry, often angry and hostile. Okay, we know people like this that are fully developed Type A personalities. Type B, sort of the polar opposite of Type A, relatively easygoing, less hurried, less hostile. So Friedman and Rosenman, all right, how did they arrive at the Type A versus Type B? And I'm proud of this image. I mean, we've all probably wanted to like chew on our laptop at one time or other. Anyway, I think it's pretty funny. So they developed a set of behaviors, this pattern that they believed was related to higher cholesterol levels, which at the time was known to lead to coronary heart disease. Okay? So they called this pattern type A. And here are some features: an intense sustained drive to achieve one's personal goals, a profound tendency and eagerness to compete in all situations, a persistent desire for recognition and advancement, continuous involvement in multiple activities that are constantly subject to deadlines, habitual tendency to rush to finish activities, extraordinary mental and physical alertness. Okay? They also developed a second set of observable behaviors, the opposite, the type B. Okay? Apathetic, patient, relaxed, easygoing, no sense of time schedule, having poor organizational skills, and at times lacking an overriding sense of urgency. All right? You'll notice that there are some good and some maybe desirable, I should say, and some undesirable characteristics to both sets of patterns, type A and type B. And so there are things that can lead to increased performance. There are other aspects here that can lead to better health. So what they did in their study, they had a decent-sized sample, 83 men in each group. All right, they recruited them according to their personality characteristics. They were matched pretty well in terms of similarity. So 45 in Group A, the Type A, and 43 in Group B. They were assigned to their groups based on criteria, and you can see across the board they're similar. Okay, they controlled for many of these characteristics so that they were trying to say, well, all right, what we're trying to account for here is the personality impact on health, on cardiovascular status. So you look across here, similar in many regards: the weight, exercise. Smoking was certainly more common in 1959 than it is now, so number of smokers in the groups were quite high. Cigarettes a day, alcohol, total calories, fat calories. Patients with children, that was considered to be a factor involved in psychological stress. Certainly it is. I can speak from that, from experience, I should say. And so they included all of these factors, and they're all sufficiently similar to do a direct comparison. All right. So you compare blood and illness for Group A and Group B, the Type A, Type B. They thought clotting time would be significantly different. They thought Group A would clot much quicker. In fact, that wasn't much different. You see, only a tenth of a minute. All right, so 6 seconds different, really, between the two. Not much different there, but look at cholesterol. Much higher in Group A. Okay, Arcus, this is a condition of cholesterol deposits in the iris of the eye, the colored part of your eye. Very high percent, okay, for these folks. And again, these are guys in their 50s primarily, and so this is quite a high percentage. Of course, Group B, not so much. And then finally, of course, the coronary heart disease percentage, much higher. Over a quarter of them had coronary heart disease, compared to just 4% for the Type B classified individuals. So, pretty interesting, closed, open and shut case, I should say, there for the effects of psychology on coronary heart disease. How Type A are you? Remember this little assessment we did, the questionnaire earlier. As you probably deduced, it was measuring your Type A versus Type B status. Okay, so add up the total number of your yes responses for those questions. And how many yes responses you gave kind of determines your Type A versus Type B status. It's a crude assessment. Don't freak out. Please don't stress out if you get a very high score and it looks like you're fully developed Type A. 3 to 6. Now, none of us is usually a fully developed B or A. It has to do more with this balance. And really, it's a healthy balance if you're somewhere in the middle, say 3 to 6 yes responses, normal balance of personality characteristics. It's okay to be driven. It's okay to, maybe enjoy some competition. And it's certainly okay to try to be more alert. Okay, it gets you through life It gets you, you know, in a better position usually. Okay, but it's when it gets out of control, when you start getting up to 7 and 8 here. Generally higher stress level, constant chronic stress, some potential for negative health consequences. And then a fully developed type A, again, quite rare, extremely high stress level, definitely negative implications for health. So there, you've learned something about yourself, right? Awesome. Characteristics of the type A personality: frequently doing more than one thing at a time, urging others to hurry up and finish what they are saying, becoming irritated when traffic is blocked constantly. You know about people like this. Maybe you are a person like this. Difficult. You can't even wait. I had an experience in the grocery store, Kroger, a couple of years ago, where a lady had done a full, sort of looks like a week's worth of shopping, had a full cart of groceries, and then pushed it up to the front to check out, and there were about 5 lines that were open, you know, 5 cashiers, and they all were full. I mean, we were into the aisle, you know, about 5 or 6 deep, and she pulled up behind me. I was waiting in line too, and she let out this big "ah!" kind of a scream or a groan combination, and she just marched out of the store and left her cart right there and didn't come back. So she did all that shopping and then just left. She became very irritated and left. So I can only assume fully developed type A. Gesturing a lot while talking. I do this. You know, I've got some type A tendencies as well. I'm not afraid to admit it. Having a hard time sitting with nothing to do. Playing to win all the time. Even in games with children, you can't let the child win. Even if you have to like pretend like they win, you're like, oh, okay, I really won. I did it. It seems silly, but this is true of some people. Becoming impatient when watching others carry out a task. Have you ever watched your grandmother or grandfather on the internet? And you're like, okay, Grandpa, just click over there. Go click right on that thing right there. Oh, no, not the back button. Click, click, click. And then you just want to like jump on them and grab the mouse out of their hand and do it for them, right? It's hard. It's hard to be patient sometimes. Speaking explosively, using obscenities often, okay, like really sort of in an angry way. That's type A. Type B, of course, far fewer incidents of type A characteristics. Like I mentioned, most personality characteristics that will characterize in this class, there's a continuum. There's this kind of bell curve. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle between, in this case, type A and type B. So, you know, you probably, I assume most of you scored somewhere in the middle, and that's fine. It's a good thing actually in this, you know, world, in our capitalist society, to have some, you know, drive, some, you know, competitive mindset. It, you know, you actually, you know, can advance that way, and you can be, you know, successful, and that's generally a good thing. It's managing it, not letting it get out of control. That's the trick. Okay. So again, this bell curve. Normally, we've got this level of stress, and I mentioned this term eustress in the middle. It's good to have some stress. It's, you know, the performance anxiety curve. You got a little bit of the butterflies. It actually increases your performance level typically, but you go much beyond that and you become kind of an idiot, right? It completely compromises your ability to do your task, okay? Whether it's public speaking or some sporting event or musical performance, whatever it happens to be. Performance on a test. You've all heard of test anxiety. You know, you try to remember what's, you know, material, and poof, it's gone if you're too nervous or worked up. That short circuits the brain. You know, the memory circuits don't quite work. All right, so getting into the stress research, actually, what is stress? Some of the physiological parameters. This happened before Friedman and Rosenman came along with the cardiovascular work. Hans Selye, and this is in the 1930s. He is probably considered the godfather of stress research. He did a lot of work on rats and peptic ulcers, these ulcers in rats that they develop. Ulcers were a big deal. This was around the Industrial Revolution, and so people were starting to, you know, work at jobs, factory jobs, repetitive labor, stuff like that. Some of the stuff that we do today, actually. And so people were developing, they didn't know exactly why, but assumed it was from the strain of their job, developing ulcers in droves. And so there was a lot of research by pharmaceutical companies to help develop drugs and treatments for these ulcers. All right, so that's the background there. Selye found out almost accidentally about the overall stress response. Okay, they were stressing rats out, but what they were trying to do was test a drug that would help with these peptic ulcers. And the problem with Hans is that he sucked at handling rats. They slipped out of his hands, fell onto the floor, he chased them around. And so the whole idea with an experiment is that if you're going to give a drug versus a placebo, you want the rats or your subjects, whoever they are, to be treated in the exact same way. The only difference you want is the drug versus a placebo. Okay, the placebo does nothing. The drug presumably has some sort of action. The problem with Hans is that in his groups, the rats were, freaked out by this. He would literally, they'd squirm out of his hands, they'd fall on the ground, and there's some famous stories of him chasing rats around the lab for hours on end. And so he was, as it turns out, stressing the rats out. Even the rats in, the treatment group, where you're supposed to be getting this, what was a sodium bicarbonate, a Tums pill, if you're familiar with that. Pepto-Bismol has this kind of material in it as well. This was the early days of that research. So anyway, what happened was all of the other scientists that were doing this study, they showed effects for the sodium bicarbonate. It worked. It got rid of the ulcers over time. Hans's rats, all of them developed ulcers, and none of them got better. All right, because he kept on dropping them on the floor, okay, and screwing them up. So, and that sounds like an awful thing, like, oh gosh, we got to get rid of this guy. Well, what happened, and again, this happens a lot with science, is it's accidental discovery. And so what Selye formulated from that was that the body has this set of responses to all stressors. And he did this, he said, well, okay, I think what I'm doing is I'm stressing out the rats psychologically. They're dropping on the floor, they're trying to escape, all right, they're nervous, anxious, and that's having the effect on their physiology. He took them up onto the roof, he made them hot, cold, he poked them with a stick, he did all sorts of things to, it sounds awful, terrorizing a rat, but he was finding out, that what he discovered from all of these tests is that it's a non-specific response. So if you are cold or hot, that physiological response that your body has is a stress response, and it's the same physiologically as worrying about a relationship. I'm not kidding. It's identical. All right. He called this the general adaptation syndrome. That's what it's called. If stressors go on for too long, they can make you sick, like ulcers. This is chronic stress, and this is where we find most of the deleterious effects of stress. It's chronic stress. Why is it so nonspecific? Does it make sense to be nonspecific? Well, think about things in terms of evolution, survival. It actually makes sense. So the body assumes that when we experience a stress, we're going to have to use our muscles, all right, and in a hurry. And so it upregulates glucose. So it breaks apart this stuff called glycogen, little packets of effectively sugar that reside in the muscles, in the liver, liberates it into the bloodstream, ready to go. If you get nervous, you can run faster. You can lift more weight, all of this. And so it rapidly mobilizes all of this energy from storage sites, inhibits storage. Where does the energy come from? Fat cells, liver cells, muscles release glucose, fat, and some proteins. You need to get those substances to muscles fast. How will you increase blood pressure? Your heart rate increases, okay, and you start breathing more, so the blood gets around the body. All right, so that's awesome if you need a physical response to a stressor, which was most often the case in our evolutionary history. Of course, now, do we need to worry about, animals attacking us from behind a bush? on a regular basis? Well, I hope never, but certainly we don't have to worry about that stuff. What we do have is psychological stress. All of this happens. When you get really nervous about something, you can feel your heartbeat in your chest, can't you? It's the same thing, okay? Glucose, fats in the bloodstream. As you might imagine, that's unhealthy, that situation, okay? And then you don't actually use that energy. Well, what happens? It sticks to the endothelial walls of your cardiovascular tissue, okay? Clogs some arteries, okay? Glucose in the blood, if it's too high, damages the blood cell, the cardiovascular walls, all right? That's diabetes for you, okay? And stress can exacerbate diabetes. What else happens during a stress response? Well, the body halts long-term energy-expensive projects. So this is for a chronic stress, okay? In many ways, acute stress, fast and done, is good for you. Okay, this is chronic stress. Digestion is inhibited. If you ever noticed when you're nervous, your food doesn't digest. It sits in your stomach. Okay, that's because stress is like, we don't have energy to spend on that. We are going to deal with this stressor. I need you to be, to be ready to fight or flee. Okay, it's the fight or flight response. Growth and reproduction is inhibited. So stress can impact growth. Yeah, believe it or not. Immunity, it affects the immune system, suppresses it. Again, this is chronic stress. Some beneficial aspects of the stress response. Pain is blunted. You don't feel pain as readily. Okay? Cognitive and sensory abilities are greatly improved. If you've ever been in that situation, you're incredibly aware. Okay, you actually remember things. It's like a flashbulb memory in a way. Okay, so memory ability is improved. Okay, senses become sharper. Why does all of this happen during the stress response? Because it's adaptive. Okay, for a short-term physical stress or situation, this is an acute stress, not a chronic stress. Okay, for long-term situations, there's. So Selye says, he comes up with a theory, and he's still on board here, 50 years later, late 70s. The body goes through 3 stages in its response to a stressor. The first is alarm, and this is more your acute stressor. It's a brief period of high arousal of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, boom, called the acute phase response. It actually improves immune function. Okay, liberates nutrients from fatty stores on the body. It's healthy. It's actually quite healthy for you. You can mimic acute phase response stress, this alarm stage of stress, by limiting calories, caloric restriction. So if you normally eat around 2,000 calories a day and you eat 1,500, your body says, whoa, okay, that's a little bit of a stressor. You're throwing it out of balance. Okay, what caloric restriction is associated with? A longer lifespan. So you're actually improving, you're slowing down aging, you're improving the aging response. Boosts the immune system, reduces most of these age-related physiological changes. Okay, another way to induce the alarm stage? Exercise. Hop on the treadmill for a half an hour. That's an alarm stage stress. Boom, you boost this up, it increases the immune system, increases longevity, all of these. Prevents or lessens the severity of all of these diseases, okay? Diseases of aging that we see, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, stroke, cancer, heart disease. Okay, how does it do this? Well, it's a concept called hormesis. And this is a wild idea. And I was privy to some very interesting data at the Air Force Research Laboratory, where I worked for 5 years. And what hormesis is, and it's an overcompensation for a mild environmental stress. What this graph shows is an exposure to radiation, nuclear radiation. And so at a sufficient level, if there's just enough to produce the right amount of stress, okay, the right amount of alarm stage stress, you see the mortality ratio drops. It goes down to nearly 0, okay, at a certain dose of radiation. After that point, you don't want any more of that because it will eat you up. It'll destroy your cells, it'll produce cancers, and you will die. The mortality ratio goes way up, okay? how do we know about this? Well, it's a bit of a, you know, sad, ironic story how we know about this. This is from World War II. You know, of course, the bombs dropped on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you were near the bomb, of course, you perished. And then slowly the percentage of fatalities were, you know, they went down, and life expectancy slightly went up as you went away from the actual center of where the bomb went off. And then you got out a ways out, a mile away, roughly, and there was an annulus, a ring, around the epicenter of the bomb, where people lived on average like 5 or 6 years longer. And then outside of that ring, it was sort of back to, you know, normal life expectancy. And so it was systematic, the distance, the actual exposure amount of the radiation. So it was enough, kind of like exercise, you know, where you expose yourself, your body to, you know, you wear it down a little, and then it comes back and it gets stronger, right? That's the idea. So this is what happened to those folks in Japan. And I saw those data and I thought, wow, that's incredible. I mean, again, a terrible sort of sad way to learn that lesson, but this is how it works. Second stage, resistance. This is okay. You're in the middle. You're resisting prolonged but moderate arousal. Okay, and then if you keep stressing out, you get to this point of chronic stress, exhaustion, caused by prolonged stress. This is when all the negative consequences of stress usually occur. All right, so another little assessment here. You love it, I know you do. Just indulge me. It's a wonderful thing you're going to learn about yourself, I promise. All right, for each statement, indicate your level of agreement. And use this scale, 1 to 4, 1 being strongly agree, 2 agree, 3 disagree, 4 strongly disagree. Okay, and be as honest as possible on these. All right. Number 1, when I have undertaken a task, I find it difficult to set it aside, even for a short time. Number 2, all in all, the world is a good place. And remember, just be honest about how you feel about these statements. When I undertake something new, I expect to succeed. It does not take me long to shake off a bad mood. Number 5, my hardest battles are with myself. 6, it's who you know, not what you know. 7, it is better to expect the worst. That way, you won't be disappointed if things don't work out. 8, before an interview, I am usually confident that things will go well. 9, sometimes I feel down, but I bounce right back again. And 10, gambling makes me very uncomfortable because it's like throwing money away. We are going to revisit that. I'll score it and give you guys an idea of what it all means. All right, so you might be thinking, and I referred to this earlier in the presentation, that, well, everybody's a little different in how they handle things. Personality is so variable. And so sometimes there are things that stress one person out really badly, and they just roll off of somebody else. It doesn't bother them at all. So Richard Lazarus, you know, sort of summed this up. The amount of stress depends on the perception of the event or situation. It's a very important distinction because as humans, we're predisposed to predict nearly everything about ourselves and the world. It's a habit, and it's normally adaptive. If you predict, and we're pretty good predictors, we associate things that go together, you can know what's going on. Well, sometimes you can't know what's going to happen, but we still try to predict it. Okay, we still try to predict. The problem is sometimes we incorrectly anticipate negative events. And more commonly, this is known as worrying. Okay, and it's, of course, associated with pessimism. So if you are predicting negative outcomes all of the time, you are a pessimist. Most of you probably know if you're an optimist or a pessimist. And again, like with type A and type B, it runs a spectrum. Okay, it's not simply you are a pessimist or an optimist. You're somewhere in the middle, and a balance is certainly most beneficial to a person, to be balanced in some sense. You don't want to be a wild optimist, nor is it necessarily good to always be negative, a pessimist. So, are you an optimist or a pessimist? You know this, right? Probably. We're going to find out. Here we go. Add up your total, add up and total your scores from questions 1, 5, 6, 7, and 10. And this is from the, of course, the little assessment we just did on the previous slide. So add up all of those, 1, 2, 4, 3, 2, whatever they happen to be, sum those. Okay, then add up your total from the other questions, 2, 3, 4, 8, and 9. So you'll have 2 totals. Then you subtract the number 2 in this list here, not the question 2. So your sum from number 2 from number 1, so 1 minus 2. Okay, this is the total from number 1 minus the total from number 2. The answer can have a positive or negative value. No big deal. This is your optimism-pessimism score. Again, it's a crude assessment. Don't panic if you are determined to be a total, full-on optimist or pessimist. It is fairly accurate, I will say that. But again, I'm just the messenger, so don't shoot me. All right, so here's the score. Scoring, I should say. Minus 15 through minus 12, extremely pessimistic. 11 through minus 6, pessimistic. Minus 5 through minus 2, somewhat, and so on and so forth. Okay? Again, if you're somewhere from minus 5 to plus 5, it probably, I would guess that most of you are in that range. Okay? It's healthy to have some optimism. It's healthy to have some pessimism. There are arguments for both positions. Certainly, you know, as an optimist, if you have, if you were, genuinely optimistic, say you scored a 9 or a 10 on this scale, what happens with optimists? Well, sometimes they're so optimistic that they actually make that prediction of optimism, the positive outcomes, come true. They make it happen. All right, and so being negative kind of never got anything done. However, when you're pessimistic about something, you become slightly more what we call realistic, and so that can actually be helpful as well. You won't make large, sometimes embarrassing mistakes if you are somewhat pessimistic. Okay, so again, a mix of both is good, and it's good to be hopeful, but you got to be real at the same time, right? Okay, so I believe this is the last slide, and I